get into our first heat of senior gilts here, and I think a very nice heat, a challenging heat though to sort, a lot of parts and pieces to work with, and maybe finding the total package isn't maybe just as simple of a route as what we normally like to find, but certainly quality all the way throughout. I'm the most comfortable, bar none, starting with entry number 28. To me, that's the gilt that's the combination of many in this class. That's the moderate framed one. That's the best balanced from the point of her shoulder back to the set of her hip. She's comfortable in terms of her movement pattern, and most appropriately, as you'll hear me talk later in this class, she's the most genuine, she's the most consistent in terms of her width when we start at the base of her chest and work to the ground, and when we step in behind the female and we study her from the top of her hip all the way down to the surface of the ground. The set to her hock, her openness of structure when we are able to analyze her from behind is really what helps her kind of excel and win this class. Very nice balanced female there to start us off with. Entry 27 on your screen is going to go ahead and be second in this particular heat. And I think a gilt that honestly offers a lot of similarities there to our class winner. And I don't know if we have similar bloodlines at work or at play there, but I do think two very similar gilts, just in terms of their general makeup, their coloration, parts and pieces, and in terms of height and type and kind there. Mainly our sort there between that top pair becomes more of a balance issue. Not so much in terms of feet and legs, as I think both of those gilts are high quality and good in terms of their width and their squareness. Reads just a bit steeper at the point of her hip, wants to trend downhill just a shade more in terms of her elevation. In my breeding program at home, we like to find them just a bit more balanced, a bit more level in terms of their top line there. Just need to fix her in that regard, but certainly, like we mentioned, a lot of quality, a lot of similarities we can draw between her and the gilt that wins our class. My problem child, as we'll refer to her lovingly here, is entry number 29. To me, front two-thirds of this animal, I think, are class-winning quality there. I think so good in terms of her spine and the way it lays in her. She's level and composed about her top line. She's comfortable, and she hinges loose out of her shoulder. I love the set and usage to her front ankle there. She's a moderate female, which tends to be maybe more towards my alley in terms of her spine length. Offers the appropriate amount of flesh and rib and fill and body there. Very good in terms of function. Where we come into problems, we step in behind her, we view her going away from us. She is the most closed up, the most condensed in terms of her width from behind. She funnels up the most from the point of her tail on down to where her hooves meet the surface at. I need to open her up just a bit more to be just a shade more comfortable, especially in the female side of things. Having a sturdy foundation that sits out wide and true and square is exceptionally important to me. Unfortunately, for a gilt that's that good, we have to single trait her maybe in one area versus a few others, but maybe just a bit more uncompromising in terms of that regard. Need to see her just a bit broader as she goes away from us. We round out with one that's maybe on the opposite of that spectrum there. Entry number 30. Very attractive gilt. Offers some pieces there that can really draw your attention. She gets out. She's obviously comfortable, obviously loose made. I think she hops and skips a few times in the video. I like that athleticism. That tells me everything's working good within the front portion of her skeleton. Tells me she's a comfortable made gilt that has the correct angles there to her body to be able to do things from that regard. Once again, we step in behind her and we're on the opposite end of the one we just talked in third. She's almost just a bit too wide in terms of her hock set there. She wants to take maybe the middle of that hock joint, kind of flare it out. I don't want to say she bows, but I want to say she kind of pushes the outer wall there of her hip and where she wants to put her hock, and at the same time maybe just gets a bit indifferent on where she places her rear feet. And I think we can kind of tone that in and condense it just a little bit more, allow her to keep that step and that width from behind just a bit more contained, then I think there's a lot of good there within that particular female, especially within the breed there and what she can offer. A very good group here all the way through. Like I said, some challenges there to sort through in terms of where your priorities need to land at, but very comfortable on where we land at here. Excellent first heat of senior gilts. Very nice second heat of senior gilts we get into here, and I'll be honest, one I can land on in a hurry here to start us off is entry number 31. And I think a totals type of female, one that is so good in terms of her top line composure and balance, adequate for me in terms of where she reads at from a flesh and depth of body perspective there, still feminine and yet youthful about her head, and yet we study her at the surface, and that's where she begins to exceed and excel from a few more of her peers in this class. That is a heavy-featured type of individual that sits down on a sturdy foot, a hefty base, and as sound as the day is long. I admire that Gilt's ability to take a step and yet fill tracks from where her foot left prior. I think a comfortable made one that comes with some extras in terms of that extra level of balance and presence, and yet can still do it in a sturdy, kind of heavy-duty built package. Very nice type of Gilt there to start us off with. I think a similar one in terms of build and just comfort is where we can land at in second here. I like entry number 32 to go ahead and be second in this particular heat. I think a Gilt, like we just talked, versus our class winner, same type of free range of motion, same type of added comfort level and step. Another Gilt we can appreciate a lot about when we get her out and then begin to study her off from a distance, from how her locomotion works and how her skeleton kind of fits and bends and does what it needs to there. Is she as heavy duty in terms of her lower feature? Is she maybe just quite as out there in terms of her width when we begin to study her at her base? Probably not. Dealer's choice here, judge's preference, I guess, if you will. She's a bit shorter faced, maybe a little bit more compact in terms of her muzzle, maybe not quite as elegant or broody looking as a couple of the other females. That's a small thing. That's a small tree in a big forest to pick on there, but ultimately where we find her into second versus our class winner, I don't rate her just quite as heavy duty in terms of her foot or in terms of where her feet and her base want to sit within that Gilt, but a very good type of Gilt, one we can admire a lot of things about. It's a very good top pair here to start off the second heat. Third place in this class, I like entry number 35. To me, maybe one that's a bit more challenging to read in this particular video. She's obviously on the bigger end of things in terms of size and stature and flesh within this particular class. Maybe not one that wants to maybe just get out and showcase herself as athletic. From where we can study her at, I don't read her to be as tall at the point of her shoulder. I rate her to be just a shot steeper in terms of her rump and wants to give her just kind of a downhill trajectory there to her balance. Didn't read her to be just as good in that regard as where we like those first two Gilts that are maybe just a bit more composed and balanced and level made and more free flowing in terms of their movement, where this Gilt is maybe wanting to run downhill just a shade in terms of where her shoulder sits into her. But I like that bigger frame. I like that added stature, that power, that body that this Gilt offers there, and yet still with all that extra flesh keeps a very nice maintained underline there. A good teat count there as well. Very composed in terms of her bottom line there. Nothing's wasty, nothing's too far gone. Good type of Gilt there, and I thought a nice place here to land in the 3. Fourth in this heat, I like entry number 33, and that to me is another one that we can appreciate a lot about in terms of maternal characteristics. Another one that's a swoop to her underbelly, just a set and confirmation of her underlying and her teats there. Very maternal. We like a lot about that, whether it's in the Cooney breed, heritage breed, show pigs, commercial hogs. That type of underline, that type of maternal characteristic isn't one that goes out of fashion, and certainly does not fall on deaf ears to this particular show judge, because I think those are all very good things. To me, she's a bit softer made. She's maybe just a bit looser about her jowl, maybe a bit steeper and rounder off the back of her hip versus a couple others. But in terms of squareness, we're good. In terms of width, we're good there. Just a couple minor differences there that sort her on down to the line in this particular heat of senior Gilts. We round out with one that's maybe just a kind of a type breaker in terms of breed. We say that as if, maybe one that's harder just to pencil on or try to figure out where she fits into the matter here. That's entry number 34. To me, as a Cooney judge, I like to see the body of volume these sows and Gilts can carry. I like that added rib shape. I like that added power and center body and flesh. This is a Gilt that maybe just gets a bit drier in that regard for us. She's the most one-dimensional in terms of her rib structure. She's a little more drawn up in terms of her flank. She's just a leaner meg hog all the way through. With doing that comes some advantages just in terms of comfort and range of motion, ability to move. She's obviously weighed down by less flesh and bulk there, so she is able to get out. She is able to move, and if you want to make the argument that, hey, she's athletic, she's square, she's sound, you can move her up off that regard, I won't argue with you a whole lot. To me, judge's preference here, I would like to see her come with a bit more power, a bit more broodiness, I guess, if you will, in terms of her center body. Read her just to be a bit bit bolder and a bit more maternal about that forearm and into that flank and belly and underline there. But still a great gilt structurally. Like some parts and pieces about her. Her extension, her balance up high, all very good within her there. Good, very good, very deep second class here of our senior gilts. Congratulations. We get here for your senior gilt championship drive, and I think a very nice pair of respective winners out of the two heats that we had to offer in this particular age division. I guess for me, when we compare them back and forth, there's one that I think is just a naturally geared a little bit higher in terms of the range of motion, a little bit fuller off the backside of their hip and rump, and yet proportions very deep in terms of her body, very broody and maternal. Should be a very fun piece going forward. I like our winner out of the second heat. That's entry 31 to go ahead and be our champion here. That drops in our second place there in contention for this class. And I think a gilt, like we talked in that particular lineup, pattern's very similar in terms of free hinging range of motion, in terms of comfort, having just a shade more power off the backside of her hip. We critique her just a little bit. We call her shorter muzzled, maybe a bit more compact in terms of her face, not quite as elegant or feminine about just her head, but I think in terms of her basics, in terms of her breeding aspects and values there, I like her to be reserved. Your entry number 32 will be reserved for third overall, and your senior, that leaves our class winner out of heat number 1. That's entry number 28. Very good type of individual, like we talked, on the come up in terms of build and design. Very good, and yet still just a shade more immature than the two gilts we find just above her. Wants to dip and round off the back of her hip just a little steeper, not quite as powerful off of her rear hip and skeleton is what we found, but one that certainly has a lot of time left to mature and fill out with that type of skeletal build and design. I think the odds are in her favor as she goes forward. Very good division of senior gilts. Congratulations.